Hello everyone, thank you for joining me again and welcome to any new viewers. This is To The Point English with Ben. I'm Ben. Now, there are certain grammatical structures in English which, if I'm being honest, which I always am, of course, we don't use on a day-to-day basis. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't study these grammatical areas because they can be very useful in more formal situations or in your writing, for example. And of course, for Cambridge English exams or any English exams, you need to know all the grammar. The conditionals, however, are extremely useful because we do use them on a day-to-day basis. They can be used in more informal colloquial situations, but also formal situations and in your writings. Now, of course, there is a lot of content available online, lots of videos and websites, and of course in your exercise books you'll find exercises and information about how to form conditionals and how to use them. But in this video, I thought we'd look at them from a slightly different perspective. And in order to do that, we need to go outside. So you can see why I wanted to film outside on this lovely spring evening. But now what I'm going to do is, with the help of this stone, I'm going to teach you all of the conditionals in English. Well, almost all of them. There's one more which I need to explain at the end because it's the least common and we can't use the stone as an example, unfortunately. Okay, so the zero conditional first of all. If you drop stones, they fall to the ground. See? And the first conditional, if I drop this stone, it will fall to the ground. See? And the second conditional, if I dropped this stone, it would fall to the ground. But I'm not going to. And the third conditional, if I had dropped this stone, it would have fallen to the ground. But I didn't. And the mixed conditional type 1, if I had dropped this stone, it would be on the ground now. But again, I didn't drop the stone. Okay, so those are 5 of the conditionals. So we have the zero, the first, the second, the third, and the mixed type 1. So let's go back to the zero conditional. So I said, if you drop stones, they fall to the ground. Okay, so you can see that that's the if clause plus the present simple, and then the main clause also with the present simple. And we use the zero conditional for general facts of life. If you drop stones, they fall to the ground. That's true for all stones in the world. Whether you drop them, I drop them, anyone drops them. It's gravity doing its work and pulling the stone to the ground. A couple more examples of the zero conditional. If you heat ice, it melts. Again, if you heat ice, if I heat ice, anyone, it's not particularly about you, it's the general you here. It's a fact, right? If you heat ice, it melts. One more example, if you sit in the sun for too long, you get burnt. Again, that's a fact, right? I'm not talking about you, I'm not talking about me, it's just the general you. It's a fact. And the first conditional now, it's very similar, but with an important difference. I said, if I drop this stone, it will fall to the ground. So the difference there is that the if is used with the present simple, as with the zero conditional, but the main clause is with the future simple, so it will fall to the ground. In this case, it's more specific. I'm not just talking about general facts, I'm talking about this, in this specific case, if I drop this stone, it will fall to the ground. So it's much more specific. These are both real situations. The zero conditional and the first conditional are referring to real situations, not hypothetical situations, which we're going to look at from the second conditional on. So a couple more examples with the first conditional. If you study harder, you will pass the exam. So if you study harder, so that's the if clause with the present study in the present tense, you will pass the exam. So that's the future tense in the main clause. And using the same example as before, but with the first conditional, if you sit in the sun for too long, you will get burnt. Okay, in this case it's personal and specific. I'm not just talking about the general you, I'm talking about you watching this video. Of course I could say, if I sit in the sun for too long, I will get burnt. In fact, I think I am getting burnt now, so I have to finish this video pretty quickly. But it's much more personal, right? The zero conditional is more general, just general facts about life. The first conditional is more specific. The second conditional now. Now I said, if I dropped this stone, it would fall to the ground. So here we're using the past tense with the if clause, and then the conditional, so the would with the bare infinitive. So if I dropped this stone, it would fall to the ground. So here we're getting into the unreal situations. It's hypothetical, because as I said, I didn't drop the stone. It remained in my hand. I'm just imagining what would happen if I dropped the stone. So we use the past tense of the main verb in the if clause, but we're not talking about the past. I'm talking about now or in the future. If I dropped this stone now, it would fall to the ground, or tomorrow, or next week. So although we're using the past tense of the verb, we're not referring to the past. And that's one of the most confusing but important aspects of the conditionals, with the unreal conditionals in particular. That's where people get a little bit lost. But let's look at a couple of examples with the second conditional. If you studied harder, you would pass the exam. So if you studied harder, you would pass the exam. So in that case, it's more, again, hypothetical. I'm just saying in an unreal situation, if you studied harder, you would pass the exam. Or if you sat in the sun for too long, you would get burnt. So again, this is true, but I'm speaking hypothetically. Maybe you're sitting at home watching this on your television or on your tablet or on your mobile phone. But I'm saying if you sat in the sun, hypothetically, for too long, you would get burnt. So moving on to the third conditional now. So I said if I had dropped this stone, it would have fallen to the ground, but I didn't. So this is referring to unreal situations in the past. Neither of those actions happened. I didn't drop the stone, and therefore it didn't fall to the ground. That's the reality. But if I had dropped the stone, so in the if clause we're using the past perfect tense. If I had dropped, that's past perfect. And then in the would clause, we're using the present perfect. So it would have fallen. It would have fallen. So that's the present perfect. It's an unreal situation, so we use the third conditional to talk about things that didn't happen in the past. So let's look at two more examples now. If you had studied harder, you would have passed the exam. So unfortunately, the person I'm speaking to here failed their exam, but we're kind of looking back and speculating or imagining what would have happened if they had studied harder. But the reality is that they didn't study harder, and therefore they failed the exam. They didn't pass the exam. But we're imagining, we're regretting or imagining what would have happened. And if you had sat in the sun for too long, you would have got burnt. So again, in this case, the person I'm speaking to didn't sit in the sun for too long, so they didn't get burnt, so everything is okay. But we're imagining what would have happened in an alternative universe or an alternative reality. If you had sat in the sun for too long, you would have got burnt, but fortunately you didn't, so everything's okay. So the mixed conditional type 1 now. So I said if I had dropped this stone, it would be on the floor now. So you may have recognized if I had dropped this stone, that's an example of the third conditional, right? If I had dropped this stone. So the first part of this sentence is a past action which didn't happen, so like the third conditional. But the second clause, the main clause, is using the same structure as the second conditional, right? So it would be on the ground now. That's because that's the consequence in the present. The first action which didn't happen, the consequences of that non-action are something which didn't happen in the present. So if I had dropped this stone, which I didn't drop the stone, it would be on the ground now. But it's not, because I didn't drop it. So again, using similar examples, if you had studied harder, you would have the certificate now. So if you had studied harder, so the same as the previous example, but the consequence is that you would have the certificate now. So you would have passed the exam in the past, but now you would have the certificate. Again, neither of those actions happened, so because you didn't study harder, you don't have the certificate now. The past action which affects the present. And of course, if you had sat in the sun for too long, you would be burnt now. So again, imagining that this is a recent situation, maybe half an hour ago you were sitting in the sun, but fortunately you decided to go inside before you got burnt. But now we're imagining what might have happened, what could have happened, what would have happened. So if you had sat in the sun for too long, 2 hours ago, half an hour ago, 3 days ago, whatever, you would be burnt now. So the consequences of you sitting in the sun would be that you would be burnt now, but fortunately nothing happened because you didn't sit in the sun for too long. Okay, so those are the most common conditional structures, but there is one more, and that's mixed type 2. And this one's a little bit complicated to get your head around sometimes. It's a bit confusing. And unfortunately, I can't use the stone for this example, so I'll throw that away. But we use the mixed type 2 conditional in a similar way as the mixed type 1, but the time that the actions took place swaps. So, as I said, with a mixed type 1, you have a past action, which didn't happen, that affects the present action, which didn't happen. In this case, we're talking about a present action first, or a present situation. It's not an action because it's usually a quality or something permanent. It's very confusing, but with the examples, I think you'll get it. So if I were Spanish, I wouldn't have had to learn the Spanish language. Okay, so here I'm saying if I were Spanish, if my nationality was Spanish, so now, in the future, in the past, just in general, then I wouldn't have had to learn the Spanish accent in the past. So the fact of being Spanish is permanent, it doesn't change, but I'm not, so I had to learn Spanish, the Spanish language. And if I had paler skin, I would have got burnt. Maybe yesterday I was in the sun for too long, but fortunately I didn't get burned because I don't have very pale skin. But if I had paler skin, I would have got burnt. Now, one thing, of course, you have to keep in mind with the conditionals is that you can always invert the clauses. The if clause, in my examples, always came first, but you can swap the order of the clauses and it doesn't really change the meaning. It may change the emphasis a little, but it's perfectly okay to use the would clause before the if clause. Okay, so there are a lot of examples for you to mull over there. I highly recommend you come up with your own examples because it's a really good way to really understand not just the grammar, but also how these conditionals are used in different times, and get an idea for when they're unreal conditionals, when they're real conditionals. The more examples you can think up, the easier it will be to remember. But now I really think I am getting burnt having given all those examples about spending too much time in the sun, so I'm going to go indoors. And I'll see you very soon for another video. Come on, Amy.